This taillight is from my 1991 Honda Beat. Although it serves its purpose, I wanted to modernize it to resemble taillights on newer cars, so I could feel like I have a new car while driving around this 30-year-old piece of crap. So in this video, I'll show you how I turned the old taillights on the left into something kind of newer like you see on the right. But before we get started, I can already predict that some people are gonna go bonkers, saying that's illegal and it's unsafe, blah 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 blah. And all I have to tell you is,
this ain't middle of the mile shit, this that real custom shit.
Anyway, let's get started. I removed all the ancillary components like the foam gasket and the bulb holders. I didn't throw them away yet though, because I'll reuse them near the end of the project. To get the lens off the housing, I used my oven, which is basically a wooden box lined with foil. I wanted to heat up the butyl that seals the lens to the housing, and the light only needs to be in the oven for about 10 minutes to get the butyl soft. And don't worry, the heat gun resting right against the wood won't cause a fire. If you're using a traditional oven, you could bake the taillight at 270 degrees Fahrenheit for about 7 minutes. After everything is heated, I put some gloves on because it's pretty hot, and used a plastic prying tool. I wedged it in between the lens and the housing, making sure to take my time not to break anything. It took a couple of cycles of heating it up in the oven to get everything loosened up. When I started to get a small gap, I used a lock ring plier tool to spread the lens and the housing apart section by section. Once the lens was off, I marked the areas where I wanted to cut on the housing. I'm not sure if it's mainly because the Beat is a K car or a micro car, but these taillights are much shallower than other cars, so there isn't too much room inside the housing. I made sure to give myself enough clearance and cut as much as I can without compromising the structural integrity. When cutting plastic, I like using this Dremel cutting bit because it doesn't clump up the plastic as much as the abrasive cutting wheels do. Keep in mind it still flings hot plastic everywhere, so make sure to wear safety glasses at least. After cutting the bulk of the material off, I used a deburring tool to get all of the plastic dingleberries off and smooth everything out with 80 grit sandpaper. Now, moving on to making a new lens. My plan is to graft a new 3mm acrylic piece onto the OEM lens. To do that, I preheat my oven top and bring back my oven box. While that's heating up, I sandwich a piece of red acrylic between two wooden frames. Then I place it on top of the oven and cover it with the lid I used earlier. After a few minutes, the acrylic will start to sag, and you want the consistency to be pliable, kind of like a fruit roll-up.
Here, it's a fruit roll-up.
Once the acrylic is mushy, I stretch it over the headlight lens. As a side note, I place the OEM lens back onto the housing so it can retain its shape during this process, since I'm pushing the acrylic around with some force. Some areas cooled off before I was able to shape it, so I used the heat gun to get the area pliable again and just continued to form it. Once I was happy with the forming process, I marked the perimeter of the lens so I could cut it out. And similar to the housing, I used the Dremel to cut out the new lens and deburred the edges. Since we don't have an air compressor in the shop, it's handy having a cordless leaf blower to get all the plastic shavings off the lens. I placed the new lens on top of the old one and traced around it. Then I drew another line offset about ½ an inch toward the inside, leaving a lip of material the grafted lens will attach to. Then I used an abrasive cutoff wheel this time because the OEM lens has a few layers to cut through, and the other cutting bit isn't quite large enough. This part gets pretty messy and the tool gets gummed up with molten plastic, so you need to stop and clean it off pretty frequently. Once I got the center section cut out, I sanded the lip with 80 grit sandpaper. I sanded in a crosshatch pattern on the mating surface of the new and old lens to make sure there's a good mechanical bond when I apply the adhesive. I wiped the mating surface with denatured alcohol to remove grease and oils, and then use CA glue to bond the new lens onto the old one. I'm impatient, so I like to use activator to get the glue to cure instantly. To keep everything watertight, I lined the inside of the lens with painter's tape and left about an 1/8 inch gap around the perimeter so I could apply the adhesive sealant. The tube exploded on me, so I just scooped out the fresh sealant with some scrap wood and spread it around. After the inside was done, I made a tape handle on the front so I could hold it up and spread the sealant around the outside perimeter. I set the lens aside to cure and moved on to making the new LED diffuser panel. At this point of the project, I wonder if I'll be happy with the result. Not surprisingly though, self-doubt has become a consistent step in my DIY journey, but you know what they say.
Don't give up, Jay. Self-doubt is part of the process.
Anyway, I make a template with some duct tape and then transfer that onto a piece of clear 3mm acrylic. I cut it out roughly with a Dremel, then snuck up to the line using our belt sander. I wanted this piece to be frosted, so I sanded both sides with 500 grit sandpaper. Once it was nice and frosty, I heated it up and formed it against the back side of the lens so it could match the contour of the housing. Using the template, I scanned it and drew the new taillight design in Adobe Illustrator and cut it out on the vinyl cutter. Well, actually my friend helped with the Illustrator part because I just don't understand how to use it. Once I got the vinyl on the acrylic piece, I mocked everything up together to see how it looks. And to make sure each section of the new design lights up separately without any light bleeding through, I made a channel for the LEDs to live in. Using roof flashing, I measure out the length and width and cut it out with tin snips. This material is so thin you can just cut it with regular scissors as well. I cut reliefs about every 1/2 inch and fold the little legs over so it makes a U shape. I'm using 2835 SMD LED strips that can be cut every 3 LED increments. I made a channel for each section of the lights and stick the LED strips onto both of the legs. Once they're all made, I arrange them onto the acrylic and mark on the channels where I want the wires to come out for reference. I cut to length several strands of black and red 22 gauge wire, then strip the ends off about 2mm and tin them with solder. Then I solder the wires on all of the LED strips, red for positive and black for negative. After checking that all of the LEDs light up correctly, I place the channels into their positions one by one on the diffuser and secure them using foil tape. And with that done, we could seal up the housing using more foil tape. I cover all the openings from the front, then I flip it over and spread a bunch of RTV, making sure to get all of the nooks and crannies. Then I place the LED assemblies into the housing, making sure to pull all the wiring through one of the bulb holes, which you can't quite see because my stupid arm is in the way. Then I use CA glue to attach the assembly onto the housing. Truthfully, I didn't take that much care when trimming the diffuser and I was left with a bunch of gaps, but I just filled those in with more RTV. Finally, I bring back the old wiring harness and clip off the bulb holders. I bundled all the black wires and soldered them together. Then I soldered the LED positive wires to the corresponding wires for the driving lights, brake lights, turn signals, and reverse lights. The turn signals may need a load resistor wired in line to prevent hyperflashing, but that can be added later. And with everything wired together, I tidied the wire bundle and clipped the connector back into place. Alright, now this is where it all comes together. To reseal the lens, I rip off a piece of butyl and stretch it out like I'm about to make a pretzel, and then I press it into the channel of the housing. Then I bring back the oven one last time and heat everything up. Then I place the lens onto the housing and start pressing it into place, just working my way around quickly before it cools off. I use the heat gun occasionally to re-soften the butyl and help work the lens into place. Then it's ready to go back on the car. I think I'm pretty happy with the result. It definitely doesn't feel like a new car, but I like to think it looks a little bit cooler. If I tackle this project again, I'd probably change a few things, such as using a clear acrylic for the new lens instead of a dark red one, so I could use white, amber, and red LEDs for the reverse, turn, and brake lights. But overall, it was a fun project and I learned so much. And if you learned anything new, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more DIY content. Thanks for watching.